A single gavel strike thundered through the cramped courtroom, a harsh echo that stole the air from every set of lungs. Jasmine Crockett stood at the defendant's table, her hands clasped together, her heart beat a steady pulse of defiance. She was supposed to speak. Her attorney had told her there would be a moment to plead her case, but the judge cut her off before a single syllable left her mouth. "I will not tolerate tardiness or disrespect in my courtroom," he barked, voice reverberating against the polished wooden walls. A flurry of rustling followed as spectators shifted in their seats, uneasy. It was only 12 minutes past the scheduled time, and Jasmine's tardiness had been caused by a closed-off street downtown, an accident she couldn't control, but the judge had already drawn his conclusion, jaws clenched, eyes glaring behind the thick lenses perched on his nose. She felt a tight coil of anger twist in her stomach, but she forced herself to stand tall, breathing quietly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. For a second, she thought of letting it go, just swallowing the tension in the name of self-preservation, but then the judge slammed his gavel a second time. He was shouting again, insisting she lower her eyes, insisting she address him with more reverence, complaining that she was unprepared to proceed. From across the aisle, a court clerk grimaced, as if anticipating what would happen next. Jasmine tightened her posture. Her moral sense rebelled against blind submission. There was a hush, a brief moment where everything and everyone froze. Then she calmly asked permission to speak. With a sneer so visible it twisted his entire mouth, the judge inhaled and gave a withering look that suggested she should be grateful he even considered it. But Jasmine's voice was measured and concise. She explained the street closure, the circumstances that had put her behind schedule, and she apologized for any inconvenience caused. There was no trace of sarcasm or defiance in her tone, only a carefully modulated honesty. The judge responded with a dismissive wave and an impatient grunt as though her words were worthless. A flicker of resentment began to smolder in the corners of the room, passing from one spectator to another. Perhaps it was the subtle shift in her posture, or maybe the stoic defiance in her eyes, but an awareness settled upon the silent crowd. The authority figure presiding over them was misusing his station, and the target of his frustration was standing there, refusing to crack, her shoulders squared like a fortress wall. He raised his voice once again. "We are here for a hearing, Miss Crockett. Not an apology or an excuse to waste this court's time." The words bit through the air, hollow and condescending. It was meant to humiliate her, to reduce her to an offender in more ways than the docket indicated. She exhaled, scanning the faces behind her. Rows of quiet watchers, some of them scribbling notes, others pulling out phones to check texts, a few more leaning forward in expectation. In that tiny shift of her eyes, she saw something that gave her strength. Not pity, but a kind of unity. A lot of them had felt this brand of intimidation before. A lot of them recognized the game being played and resented it. She could feel their silent hopes pressing against her back. They wanted her to remain strong, to embody the fight they didn't always have the power to wage themselves. And so she lifted her gaze back to the judge, ignoring the unraveling tension in her chest. She nodded. She used her own calm breathing to settle the trembling in her hands. She told herself that the truth would surface, that her composure would be the surest path to exposing his misconduct. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I'm ready to proceed." The judge's eyebrows quivered in annoyance. He looked at the bailiff, at the clerk, at the half-dozen other officials stationed around the room, as if to let them all know just how tired he was of this. Then, with another theatrical gesture, he directed the hearing to begin. That might have been the end of it. A simple scolding from the bench, an unpleasant but routine moment in the labyrinth of the legal system, except that the judge's anger was far from spent. Every time Jasmine attempted to clarify a point, he interrupted. Every time her attorney addressed the court, the judge cut him short with a huff or a wave. The hearing, supposedly a fair proceeding to determine the next steps in her case, devolved into a performance piece for the judge's contempt. He peppered her with condescending questions, demanded she answer with yes or no, deprived her of the chance to offer context. After the third or fourth interruption, she started noticing the way his glare fixated on her, as though the entire case revolved around his personal irritation with her presence. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught the expression of a young man seated in the front row. He wore a crisp shirt and was maybe a journalism intern or a law student, someone who hadn't yet become desensitized. His eyes were wide, struck by the brazen hostility in the judges. Jasmine realized it wasn't just her imagination. The entire room sensed the tension. The difference between them was that she was the only one forced to stand there and endure it. Another wave of hush fell over the spectators as the clerk read out the docket, each charge, each procedural detail. Jasmine had been expecting to address them calmly. Instead, she found herself cut off by the judge's persistent cynicism. She started to feel the tingle of helplessness creeping into her nerves. It was that old, familiar weight, the feeling that the system wasn't built for people like her, that no matter what she said, the label defendant sealed her fate. A man behind her coughed, and the sound echoed. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, and the pages of the court records flicked as the clerk moved to the next entry. The judge leaned forward, picking up the charge sheet and glaring at it like it was the root of his daily misery. Ms. Crockett, he barked, are you aware these charges could land you in serious legal jeopardy, or do you intend to treat this like some casual inconvenience? The question was so out of line with her demeanor that a hush deeper than any before fell across the room. Jasmine kept her voice level. I'm very much aware, Your Honor, she said. I'm here to address them properly, and with respect to this court, he sneered, flipping a page. You've a strange way of showing respect. Rolling in late, giving me a litany of excuses. She inhaled sharply but said nothing. She let him push the boundaries, let him keep digging himself deeper into a corner. And now I'm forced to listen to more excuses disguised as explanations. Let me be perfectly clear. This is a court of law, not a forum for you to rationalize your failures. You stand accused, and we will determine how to proceed. Keep your speeches to yourself. She felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from anger that quivered at the threshold of her self-control. Glancing around, she saw a few individuals who looked incensed by the judge's harangue, but they said nothing. A bailiff stood in the back, stoic, doing his job, unwilling to intervene in a confrontation with the bench. Jasmine's attorney was turning pages, trying to find some relevant statute or piece of precedent that could rein in the judge's behavior, but the tension soared beyond mere legal references. This was personal, or at least the judge made it feel that way. Jasmine locked her gaze on the bench, lips pressed together in a firm line. She silently vowed not to crumble, not to let his intimidation tactics define the narrative. She refused to become small in the face of his disapproval. He cleared his throat, then abruptly turned his attention to the prosecutor, effectively ignoring Jasmine as though she were invisible. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, looked uneasy himself, but did his duty and summarized the charges. Jasmine's attorney tried to speak, but the judge dismissed him with a disinterested wave. The entire process was a mockery of fairness, but still, Jasmine believed she should follow protocol, wait for her moment, comply with courtroom decorum until she absolutely couldn't. That moment came faster than she anticipated. Partway through the prosecutor's monologue, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She felt it. A small buzz that might not have meant much in ordinary circumstance. In this tense environment, it felt like a warning signal. She stiffened, ignoring the phone, but the judge's hawk-like eyes noticed. She wasn't checking it, but he caught the motion, or at least the flicker in her expression. A condescending sneer twisted his lips. Another interruption, Ms. Crockett. Perhaps your phone is more important than the law? She swallowed, shook her head slightly. Her attorney quickly rose to address the judge. Your Honor, she hasn't even touched her phone. If we could... The judge slammed the gavel again, the short, sharp crack reverberating. I'm not interested in your justifications, counselor. Control your client or I will find her in contempt. Jasmine inhaled through her nose, forcing her anger down, reminding herself that part of real strength is self-restraint. She lowered her gaze for an instant, then lifted it again, speaking in a steady, moderate tone. Your Honor, I apologize for the vibration. I did not use my phone. It's on silent. She paused, but she noticed the camera phone of a bystander angled in her direction. People were discreetly recording or possibly live streaming. The judge's tirade was not going unnoticed. I understand the gravity of these proceedings, she continued. I'm not here to make a mockery of your courtroom. Then act like it, the judge snarled, his nostrils flared. Because if I see one more sign of disrespect from you, I won't just hold you in contempt, I'll make an example out of you. A charged silence consumed the next few moments. Even the prosecutor, who was presumably on the other side of the aisle, looked uneasy. Jasmine's attorney opened his mouth probably to reassert her right to due process, but before he could speak, the judge shut him down again. An undercurrent of moral outrage had begun to flow among the spectators. A few audibly murmured, though they quickly fell quiet. No one wanted to be the next target of the judge's fury. The air in the courtroom was suffocating with tension, as though justice itself was on trial. Jasmine clenched her fists under the table, refusing to break eye contact with the man who held so much power over her future. She wasn't naive. She knew that a single judge had the capacity to destroy her life, or attempt to. But in that swirl of tension, there was also an intangible sense of possibility. If he was so blatantly out of line, it would eventually come back to haunt him. She'd seen it happen before. Those who abused their authority often dug their own downfall. And if there was any shred of genuine justice left in the system, a day of reckoning would come. She reminded herself that all she had to do was remain steadfast, keep her composure, tell the truth, and watch as he unspooled himself. Her father had once told her that bullies inevitably reveal their own weakness. Even if they hold the power for a time, a single wrongdoing in the right spotlight can unravel them. She prayed her father's wisdom still applied. The judge looked at her with scorn, fiddling with the edges of a manila folder. Then he announced, "We'll take a brief recess, 5 minutes. When we return, I expect this hearing to proceed without further theatrics." In an almost comical show of self-importance, he stood and stormed out, black robe trailing behind him like a shadow of his anger. The spectators erupted in whispers. The bailiff told them to quiet down, but the tension wouldn't dissipate so easily. There was an air of disbelief. How could a judge be so openly biased, so disrespectful? Jasmine's attorney squeezed her elbow and spoke in a low tone. "We'll get through this. Don't let him bait you, and for heaven's sake, keep your phone out of sight. Let's do everything by the book." She nodded, biting her lower lip. She was grateful for the attorney's presence, but she knew that this wasn't something that could be solved with a mere legal strategy. They were dealing with a judge who had decided, for reasons unknown, that Jasmine represented some personal affront. The only path forward was transparency and patience, yet the entire situation lit a fuse inside her, a fuse leading to an explosion that would shake the foundations of this courtroom, maybe even the judge's career. Because the phone vibrating in her pocket wasn't just a casual text from a friend, nor a mundane notification. It was connected to a chain of evidence that, if revealed at the right time, could expose something far more sinister than a simple abuse of authority. Jasmine had discovered inconsistencies in her own case documents that weren't properly signed, testimonies that contradicted official records. She had reason to believe that the judge himself was entangled in a bigger web of corruption, using her case as a means to maintain a veneer of impartiality while actually catering to hidden agendas. She didn't yet have the entire puzzle assembled, but the pieces she held were explosive enough to spark suspicion. And one of her allies, a journalist who believed in her innocence, had just given her a heads up that new information was dropping that very morning. She closed her eyes for a brief second, drawing in a steady breath. She was in trouble, legally speaking, but she wasn't as powerless as the judge believed. Still, it was a gamble to reveal what she knew. She needed to time it perfectly, because once she laid it all out, there'd be no turning back. If she did it too soon, he could twist the narrative against her. If she waited too long, he might push her into a corner she couldn't escape. Either way, the confrontation was inevitable. The tension that had been building from the moment she walked into the courtroom late was just the prelude. She sensed that once the judge returned to his bench, the real battle would begin. And so she stood quietly while the other figures in the courtroom either took a quick break to stretch their legs or huddled in small groups. A few stealthy glances were shot her way, some filled with sympathy, others with curiosity. She felt like an exhibit on display, a curiosity piece that triggered shock and confusion. She refused to hang her head. If anything, she let her stance grow more resolute. She was done being cowed by authority figures who mistook fear for respect. The judge's meltdown had done more than rattle her nerves. It had ignited a sense of righteous determination. So be it, she thought. If he wants to shout and threaten, let him. I have my truth, and I have a right to speak it. 5 minutes drifted by, each second feeling like an eternity, until the bailiff announced that the judge was on his way back in. Everyone scrambled to return to their seats. There was a split second of near silence, and then the door to the judge's chambers swung open. He re-entered, the dark robe billowing around his tall frame, his face twisted into a tight expression. He settled behind his bench, glowered at Jasmine and her attorney, and murmured, "Court is back in session." The clerk resumed reading from the docket. Jasmine's attorney cleared his throat, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. The judge gave him a thin-lipped frown, as if daring him to speak. "Your Honor," the attorney said carefully, "we believe there's new evidence that directly impacts Miss Crockett's case, and we'd like to request—" "Denied," the judge snapped, not even letting him finish. "We'll proceed with the evidence we have on record. This last-minute attempt to stall is noted and will reflect poorly on your client if it continues." Jasmine ground her teeth. This was no longer just an overbearing approach. It was a direct suppression of due process. She caught her attorney's eye and gave a minuscule shake of her head. She had a plan, and she wanted to handle this in a particular way. She gripped the edge of the defense table until her knuckles whitened, awaiting the right opportunity. The prosecutor droned on, citing statutes and codes that, if used incorrectly, could paint Jasmine as a repeat offender who deserved no leniency. The judge occasionally nodded, eyes cold and unwavering. Then, as though he wanted to speed up the conclusion, the judge turned to Jasmine, voice dripping with contempt. "Ms. Crockett," he said, "do you have anything to say for yourself before I make my recommendation? Keep in mind, I'm not in the mood for further delays." A hush settled over the room. This was the moment everyone had waited for, the defendant's direct address to the bench. But Jasmine's expression was calm, her posture a display of poise. She cast a quick glance at the bystanders, at the quiet people who had come here seeking a glimpse of justice or who had inadvertently stumbled into a drama bigger than themselves. She felt the weight of each of their stares pressing upon her. Then she released the table, stepped forward, and spoke in a voice that was more measured than anyone expected. "I do, Your Honor," she said, inhaling slowly. "I'd like to share some documents relevant to my case, documents I believe this court hasn't seen yet. They were recently sent to me. They indicate potential misconduct." The judge cut her off, slamming the gavel again so violently it almost slipped from his grasp. "I said no new evidence," he snarled. "This is exactly the kind of stall tactic I warned you about. You are out of line." That's when Jasmine made her move. She reached into her files, her fingers trembling just a bit, and pulled out a folder. Her attorney stared at her, uncertain, but she pressed on. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she began, "these documents aren't new in the sense that they've only just been created. They've existed for months, possibly longer. The question is why they weren't in the court's possession to begin with." He opened his mouth to shout another condemnation, but she raised her voice a fraction, enough to be firm yet not enough to be insubordinate. "They show a discrepancy in signatures and a timeline that doesn't align with the official reports. If you'll allow me to point them out." "I won't," he growled, cheeks reddening. "Bailiff, remove that folder from her possession." At that moment, an astonished murmur rippled through the spectators. Even the bailiff looked taken aback, hesitant to follow the instruction. The judge noticed the bailiff's hesitation and barked, "Now!" Reluctantly, the bailiff advanced, hand outstretched, but Jasmine's attorney intervened, placing himself between the bailiff and Jasmine. "Your Honor," he pleaded, "please, let's handle this properly. If there are relevant documents—" "Enough!" the judge roared. The entire courtroom flinched under the force of his voice. The bailiff grabbed the folder, but Jasmine held firm for an instant, ensuring that one particular page slipped from the folder and fluttered onto the defense table. An odd hush swallowed the room as that single sheet of paper landed face up, revealing what looked like a date stamp and an official signature from the judge himself, next to an entirely different date. The hush erupted into a flurry of whispers. Like a small wind gathering momentum, the judge's eyes darted to the paper on the table. For an imperceptible fraction of a second, his composure broke. A flash of panic flickered across his face before he masked it with fury. "We will not entertain these theatrics," he said, voice shaking with poorly contained outrage. "This hearing is ended. I'm putting the defendant's case on my docket for immediate sentencing recommendation." He paused, possibly realizing that his extreme rush to judgment was itself suspicious. "Bailiff, confiscate everything." An audible gasp soared through the air. Journalists in the crowd whispered to one another, phones discreetly raised. No one dared speak openly, but the gravity of the moment bore down on everyone present. The judge was openly rejecting evidence, shutting down due process, and trying to seize anything that might undermine his position. Jasmine's pulse pounded, but she refused to back down. She leaned to the side, quietly sliding the single page into her attorney's briefcase before the bailiff could notice. "Your Honor, with due respect," she insisted, "this is an official court record that contradicts your timeline. I have every right to introduce it." He pointed the gavel directly at her as though it were a weapon. "I decide what is introduced, Ms. Crockett, not you. Another word and I'll hold you in contempt. Is that clear?" The tension was unbearable. This was a spectacle of intimidation, a demonstration of power used not to uphold justice but to silence it. For a moment, Jasmine's voice caught in her throat. She felt the tears of frustration welling up, but she refused to let them show. Instead, she locked eyes with the judge, and what he saw there must have unsettled him. A cool determination that no threat could uproot. She remained silent. The entire court felt as though it had been plunged underwater, with everyone holding their breath. Then the judge snapped, "We're done here. Court is adjourned." The official seal on the wall behind him seemed to loom, but ironically it was overshadowed by the moral weight of what had just happened. The hammer of the gavel was meant to end the hearing, yet the ramifications were only beginning. People began to stir, uncertain whether to leave or wait to see if something else would transpire. Jasmine's attorney placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We can appeal, we can request a different judge, there are channels," he murmured. She shook her head, eyes locked on the bench, where the judge was gathering his papers with shaking hands. "He's hiding something," she said quietly. "And he just showed everyone how far he's willing to go. This is bigger than my case." She thought of the text on her phone, the journalist's tip about missing records, about corruption that went all the way up. There was no doubt in her mind that the man who had just threatened her from the bench was deeply entangled in a web of official deceit. The question was, how to bring it fully to light. This thought emboldened her. She turned to pick up her bag, ignoring the bailiff who still lingered, folder in hand. The bystanders parted to let her through, some offering her empathetic nods, others busy filming the tense aftermath. As she made her way out of the courtroom, stepping into the long corridor with its fluorescent overhead lights and polished floors, she felt the weight of adrenaline. Her entire body trembled, and yet, at her core, she felt an inexplicable calm. The judge had made a grave error by attempting to publicly silence her. Now the stakes were raised, the controversy undeniable. Jasmine understood that she had a small but potent advantage: public attention. If she pressed forward with the evidence, if she aligned with the right people who believed in her innocence and despised corruption, she could do more than clear her name. She could expose a rot at the heart of the very institution meant to serve justice. She paused by a water fountain, the courthouse corridor echoing with hushed chatter. Her attorney stood beside her, uncertain how to proceed. She glanced at him and in that moment decided that backing down was not an option. "I'm not stopping," she said quietly. He stared at her, then nodded, realization dawning in his eyes. "Whatever you need," he replied, voice unsteady. "We'll do it by the book. We'll file motions, compile evidence," he exhaled. "But that judge, if he's as connected as the rumors say, this won't be easy." She straightened her spine. "I don't need easy," she said. "I just need the truth." They stood there for a moment, letting the surging crowd pass them by. The next hearing in the same courtroom was scheduled to begin soon, but it seemed as though the entire courthouse was abuzz with gossip about the previous judge's meltdown. People quietly exchanged remarks about his behavior, about the moral lines he'd crossed. There was a sense that Jasmine Crockett's story had only just begun, and everyone wanted to see where it would lead. As she gathered herself to leave, her phone vibrated again. She pulled it out, walking toward the exit. The message read, "I have more. Meet me at 2 p.m. It was from the journalist. No name, just a number. She quickly replied, "On my way." This was it. This was the step that would turn a humiliating confrontation into a relentless pursuit of truth. She said goodbye to her attorney with a promise to call him soon and hustled down the steps of the courthouse, emerging into the midday sun. The city glinted around her, bustling with life, but her mind was focused on a single question. How far would that judge go to protect his secrets? And how deep did the corruption run? She sensed that the judge's fury was fueled by more than personal distaste. There was something hidden behind his aggression, a vulnerability he feared might be exposed. If he was arrogant enough to believe his authority made him untouchable, that arrogance would be his undoing. Passing a group of people who recognized her from the courtroom, she thought she overheard them discussing the video that had been recorded on someone's phone. The judge's outburst had undoubtedly been captured. Once it hit social media, there would be questions. Official misconduct was no trivial matter, especially when it was so blatantly displayed in public. She grabbed a cab and sank into the back seat, urging the driver to take her across town. Her heart pounded with anticipation. Meeting with the journalist was a risk. If the judge discovered she was collecting evidence, the blowback could be severe, but she had to see this through. The entire ride, her mind replayed every second of that confrontation. His voice, his expression, the ways he tried to belittle her, the fear that flashed in his eyes when that single document fluttered out of the folder. Yes, she thought, he's afraid. A man who rules with intimidation is always terrified of losing control. And if she managed to release the evidence to the right people, if the press took notice, there might be more outraged voices joining her cause. The cab pulled up in front of an old coffee shop, worn bricks and a faded sign giving it a cozy, lived-in charm. She paid the driver and slipped inside. The smell of roasted beans and pastries enveloped her, and for a moment, she allowed herself the comfort of that normalcy. But she spotted the journalist almost immediately, a young woman with short, neatly cropped hair hunched over a laptop. Jasmine approached with caution, scanning the shop for any suspicious onlookers. When the woman looked up, her eyes glimmered with the thrill of a new lead. "Jasmine Crockett?" she asked. Jasmine nodded, sliding into the seat across from her. "Yes," she said quietly, keeping her voice low. "You said you have more evidence?" The journalist's gaze flicked to the side, double-checking that no one was listening. "There's a trail of financial transactions linked to the judge. Questionable dealings also. There's talk that he's been systematically burying evidence in certain cases where the defendants can't fight back. But I don't want to get ahead of myself." She leaned forward, her expression urgent. "I need to know if the documents you have connect with what I've found. If they do, we could be looking at one of the biggest scandals in the state court system." Jasmine's heart pounded. She carefully pulled out the single page she had managed to slip away from the bailiff's grasp. "It's just one piece," she admitted. "There's more in that folder, but right now it's confiscated. I'm working on ways to get it back, or at least to force him to include it in discovery, but this might be enough to prove that official documents were manipulated." The journalist scanned the page, eyes widening. "He signed off on this date, but the date stamp is from a week later. That means he was backdating official approvals. If that's tied to a financial gain, oh, this is big." Jasmine exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. For the first time, she felt vindication stirring, a sense that she wasn't alone in her fight. "The judge is clearly out for me," she said. "He's using me as an example, or maybe I'm a scapegoat, or maybe I just got caught in the crossfire. But either way, I can't let him bury me under false charges." The journalist nodded fervently, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we can cross-reference these details with the transaction records I discovered, we might have proof of corruption. Payoffs, maybe. I have to be careful, though. This is sensitive. I can't publish until we're certain, and we'll probably need corroboration from a second source, but this is enough to start building a case." Jasmine forced herself to remain calm, even though excitement fluttered in her stomach. "I just want the truth out there," she said. "I'm not trying to become a martyr or a symbol, but he's interfering with justice, and he's not just hurting me. He's hurting every person who doesn't have the resources to fight back." The journalist placed the document down, looking at Jasmine with something like admiration. "I saw the footage from the courtroom," she said. "He was practically frothing at the mouth. And you just stood there, cool as ice." Jasmine let out a humorless laugh. I wasn't feeling cool, I was burning with anger. But I also knew if I lost control, it would be exactly what he wanted, a reason to paint me as the problem. The journalist nodded. There's power in composure, and now, if we play this right, we'll have more than composure. We'll have proof. They spent the next hour going over details, cross-referencing times and dates, strategizing about the safest and most effective way to get the story out without tipping off the judge's allies. By the time they parted ways, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had a direction, a plan, and an ally who believed in her, but a creeping anxiety lurked behind her resolve. The judge wouldn't go down without a fight, and as soon as he realized the extent of what Jasmine knew, he'd escalate. She could feel it in her gut. She left the coffee shop, glancing over her shoulder to make sure she wasn't being followed. The city streets felt strangely ominous, despite the mid-afternoon bustle. Every face she passed seemed capable of being the judge's spy. Every car that slowed near the curb made her heart skip a beat. She shook off the paranoia, telling herself it was just nerves. Still, she took a longer route back to her apartment, weaving through side streets and blending with crowds whenever possible. Upon reaching home, she locked the door behind her and drew the curtains, the hush of her living room soothing her raw nerves. She set her phone on the table, letting out a deep breath. For a moment, she let her shoulders sag, the emotional toll crashing over her like a wave. Then the phone buzzed again and her pulse quickened. She had a flurry of messages, friends who had seen the video of the judge's outburst, acquaintances who worked in legal circles offering quiet words of support, even strangers who somehow found her number, praising her courage. One message stood out, an unknown number that wrote simply, "Stop while you can." Her stomach knotted. She stared at the screen, uncertain how to respond, if she should respond at all. Part of her wanted to throw the phone across the room in frustration. This was a clear warning, a thinly veiled threat. But she refused to be intimidated. She deleted the text, taking a screenshot first in case she needed evidence later. Then, using an encrypted app, she messaged the journalist. "Got a threat, won't stop. Just wanted you to know." A reply came within seconds. "Be careful, don't go anywhere alone, we're on to something big." She turned off her phone for the evening, deciding that she needed rest. Tomorrow, she would be back at the courthouse, demanding the folder be made accessible through proper channels. Her attorney would file motions to preserve evidence, and if the judge resisted, that would only further demonstrate his bias. She lay awake in bed that night, wrestling with both fear and determination. The memory of his voice, seething with condescension, replayed in her mind. That single moment he realized the documents proved his wrongdoing. That flash of alarm in his eyes kept her hopeful. He knew he was vulnerable. She just had to press hard enough to expose it. Morning came abruptly, with the shrill ring of her alarm. She got up, showered, dressed in professional attire, then hurried out the door with a renewed sense of mission. Her attorney had agreed to meet her early at his office to discuss next steps. She found him there sipping black coffee, rifling through legal briefs. He looked up the moment she entered. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "More than ready," she answered, setting her shoulders. "Let's file every motion we can. I want that folder back, and I want an official complaint lodged against him." The attorney sighed. "That's bold. You know he's got connections. The presiding judge of the district might not take kindly to an accusation against one of their own." Jasmine was resolute. "Then we do it anyway. The law is supposed to be impartial, right?" He managed a half smile. "It is, even if the people upholding it aren't." Without further delay, they gathered their materials and headed to the courthouse. The moment they stepped through the security checkpoint, Jasmine felt eyes on her again. People recognized her from the video, or from the previous day's hearing, or from the swirling rumors about the meltdown. Some gave discreet nods of encouragement. Others seemed too afraid to engage. She pressed on, her attorney by her side. They navigated the halls until they reached the clerk's office, where they filed the necessary paperwork. The clerk, an older woman with a polite but distant manner, accepted their forms without comment, but Jasmine could see a flicker of acknowledgement when she read the judge's name. The clerk stamped the paperwork, gave them a date to check back, and that was it. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, but at least they were turning. Next, Jasmine's attorney insisted on filing a motion for recusal, seeking to have the judge removed from her case on grounds of demonstrated bias. It was a bold move, one that would ordinarily be considered a long shot, but given how the judge had behaved, public outbursts, refusal to consider evidence, there was at least a chance it would be taken seriously. They climbed the marble steps to the second floor, searching for the administrative judge's office. The corridor was lined with framed portraits of judges past, men and women who had presided over the local justice system for decades. Jasmine paused in front of a portrait of the very judge she was up against. He looked younger, more composed, wearing a practiced smile for the camera. A plaque beneath the portrait extolled his years of service, praising his commitment to fairness and the rule of law. She grimaced, turning away. If only they knew. She knocked on the door, and a bored-looking secretary ushered them in. An assistant stepped forward, intercepting them. "The administrative judge isn't available right now," he said, voice clipped. "You can leave your motion, and we'll see to it." Jasmine's attorney handed the assistant the motion. "We'll follow up," he said. The assistant just nodded. There was no warmth in his expression, no reassurance. By the time they left the office, Jasmine felt that familiar pang of doubt. She wondered if the entire system would close ranks to protect one of their own. But a small voice inside her reminded her that she had the press and public sentiment on her side. The footage of his meltdown had gone viral. Ignoring that would be much harder than burying a private complaint. They headed back to the ground floor. The attorney had to handle another case soon, so he urged Jasmine to keep a low profile for the rest of the day. "Let's wait and see how they respond to our motions, then we'll figure out the next step." She nodded, though she had no intention of staying idle. Part of her wanted to stand outside the courthouse, to confront the judge if he dared show his face, but she knew that would do more harm than good. Instead, she left, stepping out into the mild sunshine. Before she could decide on her next move, her phone buzzed again. She opened it to see a number she didn't recognize. The text read, "You think a piece of paper can take me down? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Her blood ran cold. She gripped the phone, reading the words over and over. It was a direct threat, almost certainly from the judge or someone close to him. She looked around, half expecting to see a suspicious figure lurking, but the street was filled with ordinary people going about their business. She typed a swift reply, her anger overriding caution. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and soon everyone else will too." She hit send, then regretted it for a moment. Revealing defiance in a text could be risky, but her resolve was unwavering. She couldn't let him believe she was frightened into submission. Moments later, a new message arrived. This time, it was from the journalist. "We might have a second source, a whistleblower inside the courthouse. Meeting them tonight. Will keep you updated." Jasmine's heart soared. If there was someone inside the system willing to confirm the judge's manipulations, it could be the final piece. She hurried to a coffee shop to wait for further updates. Time crawled. She scrolled through social media, seeing countless posts about the judge's outburst, people dissecting every frame of the video. Some focused on Jasmine, praising her for her composure. Others criticized the judge's blatant bias. A few trolls sided with him, claiming the judge was simply enforcing discipline, but the overwhelming sentiment was one of outrage. The judge's meltdown had become a flashpoint for discussions about judicial accountability. She spent the rest of the afternoon fielding messages from acquaintances and strangers alike. A local TV station asked if she'd do an on-camera interview. She hesitated, uncertain whether going on television would escalate or help her cause. In the end, she politely declined, preferring to let the journalist handle the story in a more controlled manner. Evening descended, and the city's skyline glowed against a soft purple sky. Jasmine found herself at home, waiting anxiously for word from the journalist. An hour passed, then two. Finally, her phone lit up. "He's real," the message read. "He's got documents, recordings. The judge is implicated in multiple cases. We can bring this down, but you need to be careful. He mentioned your case specifically. Says the judge is determined to make you an example." Jasmine's heart hammered. She texted back, "Thank you, let me know how to proceed." The response came swiftly, "Working on a story. Might break tomorrow morning if we can verify everything. Stand by." She lowered her phone, exhaling a trembling breath. The sense of momentum was exhilarating yet terrifying. If the journalist published a bombshell report about the judge, he would undoubtedly retaliate. She glanced around her modest apartment, wondering if her life would be turned upside down by morning, yet she felt no desire to run. She would face whatever came, armed with the truth. That night, sleep came in fitful bursts. She dreamt of standing in a cavernous courtroom where the judge's gavel echoed endlessly, each echo morphing into a threat. She dreamt of faces chanting her name, and then suddenly turning away. She dreamt of documents fluttering like confetti, revealing secret after secret, while the judge tried in vain to snatch them from the air. She awoke at dawn, sweat beading on her forehead, but the dream's anxiety was tempered by a quiet certainty. This time, justice might actually prevail. She got dressed, tidied her apartment, then flipped on the TV, scanning the local news for any mention of the judge. At first, it was just routine headlines: weather, traffic, a local festival. Then, as the clock struck 8, the news shifted to a developing story about alleged judicial misconduct. Her heart pounded as the anchor's face turned serious. A photo of the judge, stern in his robe, appeared on screen. The anchor read from a teleprompter, "A whistleblower has come forward claiming that a prominent judge in our district has been tampering with official court documents. Sources say this could involve multiple cases spanning several years. The judge, who made headlines yesterday for a fiery exchange in the courtroom, has not yet responded to these allegations. We will continue to follow this story as it develops." Jasmine inhaled, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The door to exposing him had swung open. He would likely deny everything, claim it was a smear campaign orchestrated by a disgruntled defendant. But if the whistleblower had substantial proof, denial wouldn't be enough. Her phone chimed. Another text from the journalist: "It's happening. He'll try damage control, but he's on the defensive now. Keep your head up." She found herself smiling, a fierce, resolved grin. They had forced him into a corner. Now how would he respond? The answer came sooner than she expected. Less than an hour later, her phone rang. It was her attorney, sounding breathless. "The judge just scheduled a special session for your case. Today at noon." Her stomach flipped. But that wasn't on the schedule. He's pulling strings, trying to get you in front of him before the scandal grows. I don't know if he wants to slam you with an immediate ruling or intimidate you into backing off. Jasmine's lips parted, but no sound came out for a moment. Then she said, "We have to go. We can't skip it. That would play right into his hands." "Agreed. But be prepared for anything. I'll meet you at the courthouse in an hour." She hung up, heart pounding. A surge of righteous anger coursed through her. So that was the judge's plan: hold a sudden hearing, likely behind closed doors if he could manage it, hoping to outmaneuver the rising tide of public scrutiny. Well, she wasn't about to be railroaded. She called the journalist immediately. "He's called me back to court at noon." The journalist cursed softly. "I can't get a camera in there. But I'll send someone. We'll have reporters around. He can't silence you in secret if the press is present." Jasmine thanked her, then quickly gathered her materials. She had the single document the bailiff had failed to take. She had the recorded threats on her phone. And she had moral certainty that the public eye was on him now. With each passing moment, she felt less like a cornered defendant and more like someone wielding a small but powerful weapon. Arriving at the courthouse, she saw that the scene was different today. News vans were parked outside, cameras trained on the entrance. Small knots of protesters stood on the sidewalk, holding signs about corruption and accountability. The swirling rumors about the judge had galvanized people, igniting a sense of outrage that had spilled beyond mere gossip. As Jasmine approached the steps, reporters flocked to her, microphones thrust forward. She kept her gaze forward, politely declining to comment. She would speak inside the courtroom, not on the steps, where words could be twisted and sensationalized. Her attorney met her at the door, his face drawn but determined. They passed through security and found the hallway outside the courtroom buzzing with tension. A few uniformed officers were present, and when Jasmine approached the courtroom doors, one of them stepped in her path. "Sorry, ma'am, judge's orders. No one enters until called." Her attorney bristled. "She's the defendant in this hearing." The officer looked uneasy but held his ground. "He said he'd call for you when he's ready." Jasmine exchanged a worried glance with her attorney. This was highly irregular. Hearings, even special sessions, are supposed to adhere to basic protocol. Defendants and counsel have the right to be present from the start. She wondered if the judge was in there, strategizing, or possibly meeting with someone else. Minutes ticked by like hours. The hallway's overhead lights cast a cold white glare on everyone waiting. Journalists loitered at the far end, not allowed to enter. Court staff walked by, some giving Jasmine covert glances of sympathy or curiosity. At last, the door opened. A different officer stepped out and said curtly, "Ms. Crockett, counsel, enter." As they moved forward, the first officer tried to hold back the journalists, citing the judge's orders. The reporters loudly objected, questioning why this hearing wasn't open. Jasmine exchanged a final look with them before the door closed. Inside, the courtroom was eerily quiet. The judge sat at his bench, robed and stone-faced. There were no spectators besides a couple of clerks and a bailiff. No sign of a prosecutor. It felt like a setup. Her attorney whispered, "This is outrageous," as they approached the defense table. The judge wasted no time, speaking in a clipped tone. "Ms. Crockett, new evidence has come to my attention regarding your case. I have reason to believe you've been tampering with official records, forging documents, and attempting to smear this court." Her eyes widened. She'd half expected an attack, but not with such brazenness. "That's untrue," she replied, voice steady. "Your Honor, we filed a motion for recusal based on your behavior yesterday. You have no right to—" He cut her off with an accusatory slam of the gavel. "I have every right to protect the integrity of this court. I'm prepared to rule on your case immediately unless you can give me one good reason why I shouldn't." Her attorney bristled. "Your Honor, this is a violation of due process. We've made multiple filings you haven't addressed." "Silence," the judge shouted, cheeks flushing. "I'm sick of these attempts to undermine my authority. Ms. Crockett, if you persist in this malicious campaign, I will see to it you're prosecuted for perjury, contempt, and fraud. Is that clear?" Jasmine inhaled. She had a choice: remain silent and hope for an appeal later, or confront him outright with everything she knew, effectively forcing his hand. The memory of those threatened texts flashed through her mind, the knowledge that the press was waiting outside, that a whistleblower was revealing his corruption. She felt the weight of the entire moment on her shoulders. Then she made her decision. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "the only one undermining the integrity of this court is you." Her attorney startled, but she pressed on. "I have evidence that you've tampered with official records, that you backdated key documents. The world saw your behavior yesterday, and they're going to learn the rest soon enough. You can threaten me all you want, but the truth is coming out." The judge's face turned crimson. "How dare you?" "Save it!" she cut in, surprising even herself with the boldness of her tone. "You wouldn't let me speak yesterday. You tried to confiscate my documents. You threatened to hold me in contempt for defending myself. Well, that ends now." She withdrew the single page from her file, holding it up so he could see it. A muscle in his jaw twitched and his eyes flickered with panic. "You forged that," he snarled. She shook her head. "I retrieved it legally. It's your signature, and the date stamp is a week after. There are more documents like this which you've hidden or destroyed." "That's what the whistleblower says." A hush fell across the room, broken only by the soft shuffle of feet from a bailiff who seemed unsure whether to intervene. The judge's hands trembled, knuckles white as they clutched the edge of his bench. "No one will believe you," he breathed, voice tight. "I'm a respected judge." "Not anymore," Jasmine shot back. "The press is outside. They have the story, and soon there'll be official investigations. You can't bury the truth." His eyes darted from side to side as though searching for an exit. For a moment, a flicker of raw fear passed over his features. Then his anger flared again, but it was the anger of a cornered animal. "Bailiff, take her into custody," he shouted, pointing at Jasmine. The bailiff didn't move. The entire courtroom hung in a paralyzed stillness. The clerks exchanged worried glances. Her attorney stepped forward. "On what charge?" The judge fumbled for words, face contorted with rage. "Contempt! Defamation, whichever I see fit." But the bailiff remained motionless, locked in indecision. He knew that if he laid a hand on Jasmine now, in this climate, he might become complicit in a blatant abuse of power. The judge, seeing no immediate compliance, pounded his gavel repeatedly. "I will not have my authority challenged. I am ordering you—" The door behind them swung open and a uniformed officer from outside stepped in, followed by a senior court official. The senior official's face was grim. He approached the bench, ignoring the judge's apoplectic glare. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "there is a motion for your recusal on the record, and an investigation has been opened concerning allegations of misconduct. I've been directed to suspend this hearing until further notice." The judge froze, eyes wide in disbelief. "What? You have no authority to the—" The official lifted a hand. These orders come from the presiding judge of the district, and there are reporters in the hallway. This hearing is over. Chaos ensued. The judge tried to protest, but the senior official's word was final. The bailiff stepped back, as though relieved to have clear direction. Jasmine's attorney let out a shaky breath. Jasmine herself felt adrenaline coursing through her limbs, leaving her slightly dizzy. The judge, stripped of his immediate power, looked like he might explode. He glared at Jasmine with pure hatred. "You think this is over?" he hissed. She met his gaze unflinching. "No. But your reign of terror is." With that, the senior official escorted the judge away from the bench. The clerk gathered up scattered papers, looking both relieved and unsettled. Jasmine and her attorney stood there, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. Outside the courtroom, the press swarmed as soon as they emerged, microphones and cameras thrust toward them, demanding answers. Jasmine spoke simply, "I want a fair hearing, overseen by a judge who respects the law. And I believe that's what we'll get now." Her words, carried by the microphones, were a clarion call for accountability. The judge's career, once seemingly untouchable, was now dangling by a thread. Over the following days, the scandal engulfed the news cycle. The whistleblower provided solid evidence of backdated documents, suspicious financial transactions, and repeated instances where the judge had railroaded defendants. The viral video of him shouting at Jasmine became the face of a nationwide debate on judicial power and accountability. The district initiated a formal inquiry, and within a week, the judge found himself under suspension pending a full investigation. He made statements proclaiming his innocence, accusing Jasmine of orchestrating a smear campaign, but the public tide had turned against him. To many, he was the embodiment of institutional decay. Jasmine's own charges were re-examined by a different judge, and with the previously suppressed evidence now included, her case was dismissed. She walked out of the courthouse free, head held high, greeted by cheering supporters and the flash of cameras. Though she felt relief, she also knew there was a deeper victory here. She had helped expose a figure of corruption who had undoubtedly harmed countless others. In the aftermath, she found herself flooded with messages from strangers thanking her for standing up, from organizations wanting to highlight her story, and from people who had endured similar mistreatment. She handled the attention with the same composure she'd shown in court, determined not to let it overshadow the real issue: the need for systemic reform. As for the judge, his career crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. A formal indictment loomed on the horizon, revealing the depth of his corruption. Key people he had intimidated for years now came forward, testifying about how he had twisted the law to serve personal or political interests. It was a swift and humbling downfall. Months later, Jasmine stood on the same courthouse steps where she'd once been humiliated, now addressing a small crowd of journalists. She explained how she didn't seek fame or revenge, only accountability. She called for compassion and fairness in the justice system. Her quiet voice resonated with moral clarity, a testament to the strength that had carried her through the darkest hours. When asked how she felt about the judge now, she paused, considering her words carefully. "I'm not interested in revenge," she finally said. "I wanted the truth to come out, and it did. Whatever happens to him legally is up to the courts. My focus is on moving forward, on making sure the system doesn't allow someone like that to hold power again." Looking back on all she had endured, she felt a sense of closure. The confrontation in the courtroom had been terrifying, but it had also been a catalyst for something bigger than herself. It had sparked a conversation about justice and integrity, about the dangers of unchecked authority, and it had shown, to anyone paying attention, that a single voice willing to speak the truth could topple even the most entrenched forces of corruption. As she turned to leave the podium, camera flashes popping like fireworks, she took one last look at the imposing columns of the courthouse. She remembered the echo of the judge's gavel, the blaze of fury in his eyes, the way he spat her name as though it were poison. And she remembered the hush that fell when she refused to bow. In that hush was the seed of his undoing and the beginning of her liberation. She stepped down the stone steps, walking past reporters who shouted more questions. She offered no further comment. The bright light of day embraced her as she moved into the crowd, an ordinary figure no longer overshadowed by an unjust authority. And in that moment, she understood that true justice might be fragile, but it was also unstoppable once ignited. All it needed was someone bold enough to strike the first spark.